Welcome, everyone, to Room with a View. I'm so delighted to have all of you here with very different views as we talk through some of the international news that are making headlines on social media. First and foremost, the Brexit. 17.4 million Britons choose to leave the European Union. How much big of an impact does it still have now and looking forward into 2017?
We haven't even started the negotiation period yet. That's going to take 2 years. And I think there's also a question about when we see the negative economic impact really come in next year, when we see this rise in inflation and households start to feel the pinch a bit. You might see that public sentiment over the decision might shift a little bit. So there are some minority voices within the UK who say that we should hold another referendum. I would say that's probably not going to happen. But it'd be interesting to see how the economy plays out next year, I think.
So this is a done deal. Experiencing it through social media, it's like people are saying that this is not going to happen. Take it easy.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. But it really did. We called it the Black Swan.
The Black Swan. Yeah,
where
sure.
were you when they choose to?
I was in London those days. I was attending the so-called London Tech Week over there. You know, just so the people around me, surround me, were those kind of the tech reporters or the tech entrepreneurs. Just one day before the result, yeah. So we thought, okay, no, it won't happen. No, okay, don't believe that. Okay, everything goes on. Okay, almost like that. But just in the morning, I clearly remember. I was shocked. I see those kind of the very happy people. For those kind of the taxi drivers or this kind of the guys on underground, and they just send you, spread you the card, and I can feel that they are very happy, and I can saw those kind of the very shocked or disappointed or even very frustrated. Those kind of the reporters, like tech reporters like me or like my organization, I can see. Yeah, and everybody almost like that.
I think there did seem to be kind of this echo chamber effect on social media where everyone was just, it's a real problem these days that everyone is friends with people who agree with them, and we kind of self-select by liking and following things we already agree with, but people just weren't hearing the other sides of the argument, so they thought they didn't exist.
I sort of thought it was more of a traditional media victory, actually. It's mainly the older generation who are probably not avid social media users compared to the younger generation. So it seemed to be those sort of people who felt quite strongly about the European issue for a long time went out and voted for Brexit. And the other thing is that older people tend to vote more regularly than younger people. So there was an issue around turnout, I think, for the 20-somethings as well.
This is one of the things I think Australia gets so right, because we have compulsory voting. And this is the case study for compulsory voting. Because if you're going to have something that changes everyone's lives, this shouldn't be optional to get your head across it. There shouldn't be people sitting there after a referendum going, oh wait, what's happening? You don't choose to pay your taxes. You don't choose to follow road rules. You shouldn't choose whether you vote or not.
Yeah.
You should take responsibility for where your country is going.
Another jaw-dropping incident for 2016 is the election of the United States. Donald Trump upset all the odds and polls to be elected as the 45th U.S. president.
You see the voting base and between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in the United States, and we see and most of these kind of the people living in the West Coast and the East Coast, particularly living in California or in New York City, most of them are supporting Hillary Clinton, right? Most of those kind of people who are well educated, Asian guys or African Americans or Latin Americans, they support Hillary Clinton. Well-educated Chinese guy, including those kind of the first generation immigrant to the Chinese immigrant to the United States, even they are living in San Francisco and Bay Area, they're loving Trump. You know, that's something. First, it shocked me. Really raises my curiosity. But people just got benefit from this kind of theory. Like, so everybody think, okay, I work hard, I learn hard, I work hard, I do everything hard, so I can get a better job, I can get a better future. So that's all something I deserve.
Social Darwinism?
Yeah, social Darwinism.
I think there was an issue, I think, also with female leadership in China. I think there's a more traditional attitude towards that. I think there's been some problems with China's dealings with Hillary Clinton in the past, which means that she's not hugely popular here as well. And I think for these first, second, third generation Chinese immigration in the US, I think there's a typical sense that when you become established in the community and the society, and you feel you belong to that society,
Yeah.
then you become a bit more resistant to new outsiders coming in. So I think Trump's anti-immigration message, which was maybe targeted at Mexicans, for example, probably have received a certain amount of support because of that sort of the mentality. If you like.
What is certain, maybe the only certain thing about this election, that people are actually voting for anti-establishment instead of actually voting for one
So
certain...
Trump is establishment.
That's his incredible marketing though.
Yeah.
Yeah, he stands in front of a private jet and says he's the average everyday guy. Yeah, that's his thing. But I think China just sees Trump as someone that they can work with. I think they knew exactly where Hillary Clinton stood, and they didn't like it.
Donald Trump actually accepted...
Yeah, picked up the phone, right?
Picked up the phone and accepted Tsai Ing-wen's congratulatory calls.
I actually believe it was arranged, or just well arranged by Donald Trump's team and Tsai.
His advisors.
I actually believe that.
Yeah. This is the thing with Trump, though, is he doesn't make policies, he makes deals. So this is all just part of a large negotiation that he's starting before he's even in office. Like, this is him laying the groundwork, saying, I'm going to be boss. And I wouldn't take on China.
Okay, so you think it's kind of a purposeful strategy on his
I think
part?
it's a power play, yeah. That would be my guess, but...
I sort of feel like his foreign policy views are not very... I'm not sure if he has
Mature.
strong foreign policy views. I mean, he's got strong views about the direction of the United States, but around him he has advisors who have much different views. His Asia advisors, for example, are much different to the ones that have been around in the past, and they're much more skeptical, I think, of China's position in Asia and in the world. So we could see a hardening in U.S. policy towards China, I think.
Another talking point in this surprising U.S. election is the flood of fake news on social media. Factually speaking, Facebook and Twitter is becoming a media outlet.
I found this really interesting, and I was reading, because I know BuzzFeed did a major analysis of all the fake news, and they found that in the weeks leading up to the election, people were consuming more fake news on Facebook than real news. And that's pretty serious when 40% of Americans, Facebook is their primary source of news.
So do you go towards where the market is? I mean, for example, the Melania Trump photos, is that sort of...
I mean, I can totally see why they did that, yeah, but I think it's time to kind of start taking a little more editorial responsibility and start getting back to kind of we've taken so many resources out of the back end of news, of investigative news, and we're putting it so much more into this 24-hour news cycle where we're just kind of filling time, just anything to keep it going, that people stop listening. And so I think that's why fake news gets a lot of traction too, because it's just something different. People say, oh, the Pope's endorsed Trump. So I'm going to click on that because I haven't seen that, and I've seen every other Trump story 50 times over. And then it's really hard to tell the difference between some of these fake stories and the real ones. They look reputable. They look like they've got real reporters. They look like they could be true. And it's just, I think the onus needs to go back onto mainstream media. You can blame Facebook and its algorithms all you want, but this is 2016. This is where we're at. We need to work with it.
Now let's move on to some really depressing news. Bloodshed continues across Syria throughout the year of 2016. But the bloodiness and the brutality of this war is well understood on social media, with the pictures that went viral on the internet about a boy, Oram Dagnish, a boy injured in ISIL airstrikes, sitting in an ambulance, totally lost. That picture really shocked the whole social media world. Does that create an effect that we care more about these newsy stuff, the phenomenal stuff, instead of what's actually happening in Syria?
I think it went so viral because it's so easy to share, and it's so easy to get that instant reaction from people. And we see on social media platforms like Facebook, the algorithm will favor photos above text-based statuses. Yeah. So they just naturally share quicker, and I think they can't quantify that, but it was shared like an estimated 1 million times around the world. So I think that's why images like that just become so powerful. But in the same way, it's not necessarily new. I mean, one of the most iconic images of the Vietnam War was the children running away from napalm, yeah.
I remember that photo too.
But it just goes to show that, photography is not dead, because everyone says everyone has a phone now, everyone can do it, but there's real photojournalism out there, and that's it.
Yes, the picture speaks louder than 140 characters.
Yeah. People consume the photo, but yet nothing happened. Nothing changes.
Yes, from the dead body of a little boy on the beach of Europe, that was in 2014. That was already 2 years ago. To now, this little 6-year-old boy sitting in an ambulance. In 2016, we've seen a record number of refugees crossing the Mediterranean Sea.
I mean, it did have an impact. It did have an impact. I mean, obviously, it did have a policy impact. It's just, I mean, if you go back to 2014, it wasn't just that bad. The gradual increment of terrible news.
So you've seen progress since the
I
release
think
of
in
these
the UK,
pictures.
for example, there were campaigns trying to pressurize the government into taking a more open stance towards refugees. But I think over the last 2 years, we've seen a bit of a wind back on that position, if you like. And for example, I mean, Germany is a great example, a country which basically opened its doors to refugees coming from the Middle East, at least for an initial period. And then sentiment changed a lot after a few negative news stories and some complications about integration. So maybe it's a case of sort of realities catching up with idealism, if you like.
Europe is having its own trouble because of the chaotic situation there. We've seen groups that have pledged allegiance to ISIL ran through crowds in Nice in a truck, resulted in 84 deaths. So in the future, do we still have hope of a stable Europe?
I mean, I hope so. I mean, I think sort of the political sort of institutions of Europe are under huge pressure at the moment, and we still haven't seen a strong enough response. So I think there's a huge issue there, and I think we have to watch for how some of these elections in the next year or two pan out before we sort of write off Europe at the moment. But I still feel the core of Europe, European countries, from Germany and France, if sentiment still remains fairly positively towards the EU there, then it should remain pretty solid.
What is certainly in chaos is in the South Korean capital, Seoul. Millions of people went out to the street to protest against President Park Geun-hye because of her close relationship with a longtime friend, Choi Chun-soo, who has been involving in politics in private ways. And how does the Chinese social media responding to this?
You know, they feel exciting about that, right? You know, because of what kind of the reason? Because of the, you know what kind of the reasons? You know, China and Korea, the relationship has been experienced a very dramatical change during the past 2 years. So
With the missile fad thing?
With the fad.
yeah, massive people in China, they have very complicated feeling or understanding or feeling of the relation between Korea or between Japan. They have a very complicated feeling about these kind of things. Sometimes you know, enjoying the soap operas or the videos or the songs and those kind of the cultural relative things from the two countries. But in some kind of the historical or political issues, and they show there another face or another feeling to this kind of the issues. So people are now just people create a lot of jokes, a lot of memes and jokes.
They always say that comedy tells more truth than drama. I think people just use comedy to kind of highlight what their opinion is. But I kind of felt like with the Chinese response, it was kind of, you can tell me if I'm wrong here, but taking a bit of joy in watching how chaotic democracy is.
Yeah.
Just
Sometimes it's almost like that. It's people understanding of that.
Yeah, netizens here in China are looking at the millions of protesters on Seoul's square as they were looking, just like they were watching the Tahrir Square in Cairo when millions of people walked out, go on the street to protest against Hosni Mubarak. So people were looking at it and say, here's the lesson. Here's the lesson. Democracy is not the most efficient way.
Yeah, democracy.
It's not the most efficient way. It can create chaotic, and let's just say in our safe zone, in our comfort zone, and stay this way. Another major issue happened in 2016 is the passing of Fidel Castro. This charismatic revolutionary icon died at the age of 90, and the whole country is still in mourning right now. China-Cuba relationship suffered some kind of ups and downs, and so is the U.S. and Cuba relations. A lot of interesting things happen here. So my question is, with Fidel Castro's passing, will the economy in Cuba get better? Because we're seeing a power generation shift. Fidel Castro passed on his power to Raul Castro, who is a more open-minded and more pragmatic leader than Fidel. Any positive note for Cuba for the year ahead?
I think the reforms are sort of incrementally going ahead in Cuba. I think the big question mark for them will be how the new US administration approaches Cuba policy. So they'll be waiting to see that. But I think probably Fidel Castro's death doesn't have a massive impact in terms of policy making, given he's kind of retired from frontline politics for about a decade now. But often, with countries which are transitioning, when you have a charismatic former leader who dies or moves on, I mean, often that creates space to have a more open debate about some issues. But perhaps that could encourage the debate in Cuba about economic reform and opening in that country going forward. So there might be a little bit more space for that, I would say.
Well, Chinese people actually got quite emotional when they saw Fidel Castro passed away. Because he is personally a fan of many of China's leaders, especially Mao Zedong. His last regret was not seeing Mao Zedong in person. So how does Chinese people view Fidel Castro?
The most important thing is not he's the icon of or the idol of communism revolutionary, or probably not that. But people still believe he's an icon or idol of idealism, and who this kind of idealism reflects to who and how people will just devote his whole life to a great mission, no matter the mission is great or not until now, right?
Do you think there's any sort of implicit comparison with China's political leadership?
To respect the history of China, the history of the relationship between China and other socialism country in the world, I think, and China still give Fidel the highest respect on that, I think. But I have to point one more thing is about thinking about, will Cuba have a great or better future in terms of economy or the society in the future? I have to say, actually, during the past 5 years or during the past 5 to 10 years, things already happened in Cuba.
I would like to talk a little bit more about the uncertainty you mentioned, rather on the U.S. side than on the Cuban side. Now the Congress and the White House to be controlled by the Republicans. How is the relationship between Cuba and the U.S. going to form in 2017?
And I think it's getting towards liberalization and normalization gradually. I mean, there's a U.S. embassy in Cuba now.
Trade embargo is still in place. Somehow it loosened
so.
the
But
relationship normalized.
I mean, within the Republican Party, there's quite a strong body of support which is very anti-Cuba, particularly in the Cuban emigre community in Florida, where Marco Rubio is, who was another candidate. So he has to appeal to that. But the Republican Party is also pro-business. And there's a lot of US companies who are looking at Cuba as being as an interesting market, as you mentioned, Facebook, Google, etc. Yeah. So he's probably going to have to balance up those two. I would be surprised if he reversed completely on Obama's policy. So maybe a bit of a slower process of liberalization, but still the general trend will be in the same direction.
Yes. Let's say, what a heck of 2016. I appreciate all of your views. Thank you very much in this room with a view.